Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project, where we're creating the blueprint to help you become the best human you can be. I'm your guide and fellow optimizer, Christopher Camp. Are you someone who tends to think improvement is too difficult, not achievable, or often out of your control? Do you tend to fear mistakes before you make them and then loathe them afterwards? Those may be signs of a fixed mindset, and that can really be stunning your progress, confidence, and overall joy. We need to change that. To discuss how, our session today is titled Developing a Growth Mindset: How to Grow Beyond Your Fixed Thinking. Our expert guest here today is Dr. Carly Anderson. Carly is a founder, senior principal sports psychologist for Premier Sports Psychology. She's a licensed psychologist, certified mental performance consultant, and holds a PhD in counseling psychology. She's the director of sports psychology services for the Professional Women's Hockey League, Minnesota Frost Team, and for the University of Minnesota Intercollegiate Athletics Department. She also works with Team USA across multiple sports. The three big questions that we're going to tackle with Carly are, number one, what is growth mindset and why does it matter? The second big question, why do we tend to default to a fixed mindset and what are the consequences? And lastly, we're going to get into some solutions and clear steps we can take. Our third big question is, what are the steps we can take to build a growth mindset so that we can flourish in both life and work? So, Carly, thank you so much for joining us today. We're honored to have you here with us.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So I'm excited about talking about this topic. I think it's one that is really kind of foundational to everything that we want to do. Any sort of improvement we're trying to make, I think we have to get this down first. So let's jump into our first section where we're going to talk a little bit about what a growth mindset is and why it matters. So I just want to start as somebody who's been doing this and teaching on this for a long time. How do you personally define a growth mindset?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward that the growth mindset is this general belief that our abilities are shaped by effort, training, practice, feedback, that they can be changed and that we can literally grow and get better.
So those are all things that we have control over too.
Yes.
So this is mostly things that are within our control, basically saying that we have agency to try to improve.
Yes.
And that we're doing that. Okay. And oftentimes we hear growth mindset being contrasted with a fixed mindset. So a lot of the definition for that is sort of just the opposite. But how would you characterize a fixed mindset?
Yeah, this is more the belief that we're sort of inherently born with gifts or talents or abilities that really can't be developed or nurtured or grown upon. And it's sort of, you might hear people say, I'm either good at this or I'm not. If I fail, it sort of means I'm not actually inherently capable of doing something. Maybe it would even be things like, oh, that kind of feels pointless. I should just forget it. I'm not really naturally very good at that.
Mm-hmm. And I think we all can sort of recognize that and connect with that to a certain extent. But if we have that fixed mindset, what are some of the things that it would lead us to do or believe?
Yeah, well, first off, it's going to prevent us from being willing to challenge ourselves, take a risk, want to try something because we inherently believe it's not going to be all that worthwhile.
Right.
Because I'm not really wired or gifted to be able to do that. And then secondly, with that, it's a little bit demoralizing when you think like, I don't know if it's going to matter. It's not very motivating. And then if we do try and things don't go well, it's sort of confirming in a fixed mindset. It's confirming that, see, I'm not good at that. And why did I try? So we can give up easily when that happens.
So not only does it keep us from doing things and it keeps us from growing, that then also kind of reinforces that mindset that, no, you're not good enough, you can't do this, which is going to make you take a step back. It's going to lower your confidence and it's going to be even harder. So,
yes.
So you get this sort of negative feedback loop if you stay in that.
Excellent point.
Long. Yeah. So let me flip that now back to the positive. So what are some of the benefits of having a growth mindset? I think some of them are pretty clear and obvious, but some of them maybe not so obvious for our listeners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some of maybe the more obvious ones is if you have someone who's really growth-minded, they are going to be kind of hungry to want to learn, want to be getting better. They're always going to be curious on how I can do better. So some basic benefits of that is they're going to be receptive to feedback. They're going to be creative in how they can improve. And ultimately, the research shows that improves performance, improves performance in whatever realm we're doing, as well as allows us to be more resilient when we do hit adversity or have challenges, because we view it as something of like, that's all right. Not all right, but I can adapt, I can change, I can learn, I can grow through this adversity. Yeah, there's just a bit more positive benefits from that. And then there's some basic things of like what we said, the opposite of low motivation is that you're probably going to be more motivated. You're going to have a higher sense of confidence, better self-esteem or self-worth, and more willingness to take risks. Often you're a little bit quicker to move on after mistakes. And yeah, less, we can get into this later, but less perfectionism, which is an interesting thing in our society and our culture, because often people will sort of humbly brag about, well, I'm just perfectionistic,
Right.
As if that's a good thing.
Right.
But when it comes to growth and fixed mindset, perfectionism, it's okay to have high standards and high expectations and want to be the best. Fantastic. It's just the second piece of perfection underneath perfectionism is often fear of failure.
Right.
And that's the piece of a fixed mindset, that I can't have mistakes, I can't have errors, I can't have adversity. We want the lofty ambition with a growth mindset of, if I don't get the outcome I want or there is adversity, I can work with that, I can learn from that, I can grow. And ultimately, the being uncomfortable and the growing is actually what moves me closer
Right.
to the greatness.
With that perfectionist mindset, like it can motivate you forward, but eventually you'll probably hit a point where you recognize, okay, I'm at risk for failure here, so I'm going to stop. And the growth cycle sort of stops because that failure becomes such a concerning thing for the perfectionist. And they are so vulnerable to failure, and it can be earth-shattering for them. So their ultimate trajectory is not going to be as high as it could be if they can let go of that a little bit. You also talked about mistakes and making mistakes and learning from mistakes. And I think those with a fixed mindset, they do learn from the mistakes, and the mistakes become productive. So can you tell me a little bit about how somebody with a growth mindset versus fixed mindset approaches a mistake that they have made?
Yeah, so that's a really good point, Dr. Camp. And I think a distinction or delineation here that's important would be, on the fixed mindset, we're literally kind of fixated on the outcome and the result and the importance of that. And what does that say about me as a person? What does it say about my self-esteem or my worth or my value to this team or to this, physician group or to my job? Whereas a growth mindset, they're going to focus more on taking pride in, I stretched, I challenged, I had fortitude, I showcased creativity. I took the challenge and went for it regardless of what the outcome was. I'm not saying people kind of raise their hand and say, I want to lose, or I'd like it to have, an outcome that's not ideal. No, it's just the reality of when we're stretching and when we're challenging and pushing ourselves, that's actually where the growth happens. And so they see that in mistakes and adversity are part of that inherent journey of stretching. Whereas the fixed mindset would say, if I don't get the outcome, oh my gosh.
Right.
And the growth mindset, if I don't get the outcome, I'm gonna keep going.
I've learned something.
I've gotten reps in this,
right.
And I can learn from this and keep growing.
So the way we view or approach mistakes, really, I haven't thought about this before, but now as you're saying this, I'm processing it. It kind of affects our behavior even before we make the mistake and after we make the mistake. And what I mean by that is, if you're somebody who has a fixed mindset, you're going to be thinking about the mistake before it happens, and you're going to be worried about it, and you're going to focus on it. And it's probably going to keep you from doing certain activities and certain things and keep you from pushing yourself. So it's going to hold you back in that regard because you're thinking about the mistake in the future. And then after you've made the mistake, you're probably, if you're a fixed mindset, you're probably going to use that to confirm that bias about yourself. I knew I couldn't do this. I shouldn't have done this. Now I'm exposed. Now I'm vulnerable. It's gonna hurt your confidence. Your imposter syndrome's coming up. All of those things. Whereas the growth mindset person is going to say, okay, now I've learned one more way not to do that thing. It's a growth opportunity. I'm going to use that to inform me next time and actually give them more confidence to move forward.
Exactly.
Okay. So we talk about growth mindset and fixed mindset and sort of these abstract terms, but I'd kind of like to make it more real world for people so they could see it practically. So Can you give us some examples of how it might manifest in everyday life, and what would it look like for somebody to approach a problem with a growth mindset?
Yeah. Well, first, let me just back up to what you just said with an example. Just probably a lot of us can resonate with either having played a sport or been in a performance realm or watching sports. And so this idea of making a mistake and feeling, okay, this is a championship game or this is the playoffs. Now, oh gosh, I don't want to make a mistake. This will be really costly. What if this happens? To your point about the anticipating and fixating on what it would mean if I made a mistake or we didn't get this outcome. Versus the being very task oriented. I'm going to go out there, give my best effort. I'm going to communicate. I'm going to be a great leader. I'm going to be quick on my feet. I'm going to do all these things to the best of my ability that are within my control. And that's what I'm going to measure myself on. How well did I do that stuff? Because outcome, we don't really ever have full control of outcome and results in life, ever. Otherwise, we'd all be multimillionaires. We'd all be multi-Olympians, right? We'd all have these wonderful outcomes if we could just fully control all of them. And so I think that's a really important psychological piece to acknowledge when we're in the pursuit of something. We don't ever have 100% control. Some scenarios, it might be 10%, 90%, or 50%.
Right.
You know, if you're going to Vegas, it might be not.
Maybe less than
right?
that,
Yeah. But to know that, so that we're not putting everything on that outcome, but that we're remembering I can only measure myself on the stuff I can control. Therefore, it becomes less threatening to go compete in that championship playoff game and more of, and this is fearing not to lose, playing not to lose. We get cautious, we get tentative versus the playing as an opportunity. Let's go showcase what we can do. No guarantees, but we're going to go out and do the stuff we can do the best of our ability.
So you're adding another layer. So you're actually saying like the fixed mindset and how you approach mistakes, it not only does it influence how you prepare or anticipate a future event, it also impacts how you live in that moment during the event and then how you reflect on it afterwards. So really at all 3 time points.
Absolutely.
I haven't thought about that before. Okay.
And so back to the example of what this could look like in real life, maybe a simple way this could look with those of us that are maybe parents or have kids, or you're a teacher in a classroom or a coach. When you see a young person do something well, it's very easy to praise, you got everything right on that math test. Good job. You got 100%, especially as parents.
You're so smart.
You're so smart. Yeah. Way to get the win out there. And to encourage a growth mindset would actually be encourage, gosh, you really like worked on that math problem for a long time. I saw you really digging in on that thing for 45 minutes.
Right.
That was a lot of grit, and you were creative in your problem solving, and you persisted for like 45 minutes on that math problem. Praising that or acknowledging that versus whether or not they got it right or wrong. Because that skill set of the growth of creativity, problem solving is actually the meat of what's going to make them great in life and the human.
So helping focus on their effort more so than the outcome. Focus on the things they can control rather than the things that they can't control.
Exactly.
Yeah, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
So I think that we all oscillate a little bit. You know, I don't think we're all pure fixed mindset or pure growth mindset. We kind of go back and forth between the two. But if you had to say, where do we tend to spend most of our time? Like, what's our default as human beings?
Yeah, I love that question. That's an awesome one, because we're actually probably more wired to actually be fixed in our mindset, or, in a cliche way, sort of negative in our mindset. We're wired as Homo sapiens for survival, for self-preservation, really. And so we are sort of wired neurologically to always be on alert for threats, for perceived dangers. When we were cave people, this would be a bear. Nowadays, we still might encounter true threats to our survival. More often than not, particularly in the performance realm, we're going to encounter maybe threats to our reputation. Or threats to our ego or status. Like, if I don't do that, I might not be in the lineup. Or this person at my workplace might get a promotion and I won't. And maybe threat to your identity. If I no longer am in that role and I retire, am I even relevant? Like, what's that going to mean about who I am? So that becomes more threats around that, which can make us, when we feel threatened, go into a fixed mindset around looking at things.
So how, if we flip that and we say, okay, I'm going to have this growth mindset and I'm going to think positively, I'm going to look for the opportunity in things. How is that different than just positive thinking, which I think can be helpful, but also is a slippery slope and turning into toxic positivity? How do we enable a growth mindset without falling into that trap?
I would say the first thing with this is this positivity piece. The science around sort of positive self-talk, if it's actually not believable to you, is junky and doesn't work.
Yeah.
So you're better off actually talking to yourself in a more believable, accurate way. So it might be something like, gosh, I haven't been able to do this skill yet without dropping my elbow yet. But that doesn't mean I won't be able to get there. And you can get toxic positivity where it's maybe you're trying to be encouraging or supportive to someone. You'll get it. Oh, you always do fine. We'll get through this. And while that's very the intent is positive and trying to be supportive and encouraging, it can sometimes come off as actually invalidating, sort of dismissive or minimizing or negating of the actual courage that it takes sometimes to actually go out there and try something or put yourself in an uncomfortable situation and take feedback and be vulnerable. So really trying to validate, gosh, that took a lot of bravery to do that. You put yourself out there. Not a lot of people would be willing to do that.
No. So we have to focus on what is true. We have to focus on what's our reality and what we have control over, and focus on the helpful thinking rather than the unhelpful thinking. But we still tend to struggle with this, I think. So let's move into our second section. Well, we'll talk about why we tend to default. We sort of got into this already, and we're wired to look for threats, and so we're wired towards negativity, and it often takes 5 positive things to overcome one negative thing, which is a frustrating part about being a human being, but that's just kind of who we are. I think in part of this, some people maybe don't always know or can't tell when they have that fixed mindset because it is such a default and it's just an automatic thing. So what are some signs that we can look out for to know, hey, I've got a fixed mindset here. I need to fix this.
Yeah, I think there's the piece of being very sensitive to feedback where it feels very threatening to get feedback, maybe sensitive to criticism or being worried about being scrutinized or what other people are going to think, which is partly human nature to some degree. Like you said, it's so easy to slip into this. There's sometimes we're an unwillingness to try new things. They don't want to be, we don't want to be uncomfortable. We're sometimes worried about pleasing other people. And certainly a difficulty in handling or responding in an effective way to mistakes or unideal kind of outcomes. And then that can sometimes lead to burnout and loss of enjoyment in what we're doing. And ultimately people are like, I don't want to do it. So, but I wanted to add one thing, Dr. Camp, to the piece you said about, we're sort of wired to sometimes slip into this fixed mindset. I would also add to that culturally, our world operates in kind of a fixed mindset space. So, in high school, you don't get graded often on your process or your effort. You get a grade on if you got it right or not. And sometimes in our work, we don't get a promotion based sometimes on effort. It's like, did you do it? And did you perform the surgery well? And do we get patient satisfaction and those sorts of things? So I do think that is a hard reality. And you have layers of this onion of academic world is sort of outcome results based. Sport world is very outcome results based. And then you can have like family layers of how a family operates that might be very achievement oriented. And then culturally, you can have layers to that. And it can just get to where the person feels like that's all that matters. Not really how I go about it, but if I can get the outcome or the result.
And that is so true. And it makes it so difficult and so challenging because not only are we wired for that, but then so much about our society and culture is telling us this is the mark you have to hit. This is what you have to do. I don't care about the rest.
That you can't make mistakes.
So, we have to be so intentional and thoughtful about rising above that. And I think you mentioned, you're right. We're told that we can't make mistakes. And I think so much of this is rooted in our fear of failure. And we've talked about that a lot here on the Human Optimization Project. But I'm wondering, I'd love to get your perspective. Why are we as humans so worried about failure?
Certainly the ramifications or the consequences of failure can be massive. They can be very, very significant. They can be your livelihood. They can be, your relationships. The stakes can be extremely high. So I don't want to be dismissive of that. I want to honor that sometimes the stakes can feel like life or death. And maybe in some situations they are. But with that, there might be a whole bulk or percentage of these moments that are less actually about the negative consequences of the fixed mindset, but more what the consequences of that outcome or that mistakes or that error might mean socially. Meaning we're going to feel embarrassed. What are people going to think? What are they going to say? And the kind of the social meaning we attach to it. Shame, fear of being judged, I'm not good enough, kind of more of a threat to our identity where that failure feels like proof that I have limitations or that I'm inadequate. It's very real for us as humans.
It is. And I think these social consequences that you're talking about are probably the ones that we're least likely to recognize and probably have a much bigger impact on us than we think, right? It's very easy, or not easy, but it's easier to recognize the life or death situation, or this is going to let me put food on the table, this is not. Like those situations become very clear, and they're usually fairly well crystallized, not always, but usually. But sometimes these threats to our reputation or our image, or those are the sort of things that kind of happen a little more casually and we don't realize it or recognize it.
Yeah, because that's also requires kind of a vulnerability to be able to see it and acknowledge it in yourself and then be able to kind of acknowledge that with others.
Right.
And that's actually what growth mindset often requires us to do. The first thing when I sat down to do this with you today, I said, please give me feedback.
Yeah, right.
That is a very simple piece of behavioral. How do I do a growth mindset? I'm talking the mind, but it comes out in behaviors, right? Where our mind goes, our body follows.
Right.
So behaviorally, if I want to practice more of a growth mindset, I'm going to do things like that with my boss, with my teacher, with my parents. Hey, give me feedback.
Right.
Just that is a hard thing for a lot of humans of
absolutely.
All ages.
Absolutely.
And it's one thing to ask it, and then when you receive it, then it's a whole nother skill.
I think so much of that too is due to our lack of confidence, our lack of understanding, not recognizing that we can do those things. So there's so much around feedback in and of itself that makes it really difficult for us. You mentioned earlier, I'm going to go back to this concept of sort of these social pressures. How do you think that social comparison impacts our mindset, our fixed mindset, essentially?
Yeah, this is really significant. And again, if we were to reference a little bit of survival, the wiring of our brain, we're social beings. We're meant to live in tribes and groups and communities. Human beings don't survive very well alone. And so if you think historically, we need to be liked. We need to be accepted. We need to be approved of. We need to be loved. All of these things that we worry that we might lose is wired into us to be able to survive and stay in the pack and not get booted. Particularly in the ages of 15 to 24, where that brain is finishing, developing, and growing, and is really wired to compare and care about what others and peers are doing. And so I just think that's good to like be savvy to with ourselves, so we know what our brain is doing and we don't get bullied by it. When our brain is like, oh my gosh, look over this, look what they're doing. Yes, brain, I know. And so there's the upward comparison of, well, they're doing that. Oh my gosh, I'm not. Then there's and that can sometimes create a fixed mindset of, oh, they're naturally better at it. I'll never catch up. All right, I feel kind of threatened. They just got a better pitcher or something. Then there's the downward comparison of, well, at least I'm better off than that person. But the problem with that is that, gosh forbid, that person gets better or there's a different circumstance. Our mindset is sort of fragile and collapses on itself.
It's interesting. Like we need to run our own race, right? Like you need to be careful with these upward comparisons and the downward comparisons. But I think that's really challenging for us to do because we live in a time where everybody else's successes are sort of thrown in our face. And I would say not even everybody's successes. It's their beautified presentation of their success, right? They've had a chance to clean it up and filter it and crop it and then package it up neatly
Curate
and
it.
add everything.
Yes.
And then they send it out there to the world. And that's the version you see. So it's not even the real success you're looking at. But then you look at that and think, oh, well, they're doing that, then I should be doing that as well. And so it's challenging. But at the same token, we live in society, and that requires us to interact with other people. And so we can't just say, well, forget everybody. I'm doing my own thing. I'm running my own race. I mean, you can, but that's going to cause some issues as well. So I think we have to be really thoughtful in how we continue to look to others, to have, genuine, meaningful, important relationships with them, but not always let them be the thing that determines our success.
Yes.
And I think that can be a very fine line that's challenging for us to walk. What are
Oh,
your
I
thoughts?
love what you're describing here. And yes, the piece of using others and what they're doing back to the growth mindset to learn and grow. Oh, that's creative in how they do that. Oh, okay. Maybe that's something I could try or apply. But not using the comparison as a ranking for yourself, which then reinforces that fixed mindset that beliefs and that abilities are fixed. So I think the big skill here is the awareness, which is what obviously this podcast and these episodes is helping to pique people's awareness of, like, oh, that's occurring for me when I see that post or I read this article, and how can I keep a growth mindset when I come across and encounter these kinds of very curated, shiny images or moments.
And that's a great question you can ask yourself too. When you see those shiny moments, what's the first thing that pops into your mind? Do you say, oh, what can I learn from this? Or do you say, oh, that person's doing something better than me or worse than me, either one. And I think that you can look at that, and two people can look at the same thing and have a totally different perspective on it and get a different influence from it. So if you can go to that and say, okay, what can I take away from this that's meaningful or helpful, or what can I learn? Very different. And then it can be pretty powerful. But if you use it to either artificially beat yourself up or artificially inflate yourself, then you could be in trouble.
That's right. It's truly being like a critical consumer when you can of the narrative, the messages, the images, the videos, the content that you let your brain get saturated with.
Yeah. Be careful what you like and share and everything, because that influence, and that's all happening behind the scenes and the algorithms that we don't all understand.
Yeah.
One last thing before we go into the third section, I think that sometimes we tend to oversimplify this dichotomy of either growth mindset or fixed mindset, that it's either one or the other. And in reality, I think those two sort of live on a spectrum, and you're not just one or the other. And in reality, in every situation, you're a mix, a blend of those two things to some extent. So we have to think about it on a spectrum rather than an all or nothing thing, because I think oftentimes people will say, oh, this is really challenging. I can't do this whole growth mindset thing 100% all in. It's like, no, none of us can. Just get closer. Just move forward in the right direction. Is that fair?
Perfect. Right on. Yes. You bring up a really good point. And maybe not even this dichotomy. It's not so much a dichotomy, but there might even be times where you notice I'm really growth-minded at work, and I'm kind of fixed-minded with my relationships. And so even in situational stuff, you might see differences.
We are complicated beings. All right. So now let's fix it. Let's get into section 3 here, where we're going to talk about the steps we can take. And you've already highlighted a few of these, but we'll talk some more about different steps we can take to build a growth mindset so we can flourish both in life and work. So first I want to ask, in all the work you've done with training different people's team groups and leaders, do you truly feel like growth mindset is a skill or a habit that can actually be trained and developed?
Yes, it is a skill. You can get reps in it. You can train it. You can work on it to eventually, hopefully, it becomes habitual.
And if you don't believe that's true, then that's showing that you have a fixed mindset, I would say, right? So it's self-perpetuating. Okay, so this is a skill we can train and improve. Yes.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think sometimes we talked about this a little bit, but you'll see that where it's not my problem, and a lot of maybe defensiveness, excuses, blaming. You don't want to have it always on the other side where, it's always on me, when maybe attribution, there is some situational context there too. But more often than not, around the growth mindset, fixed mindset stuff, it comes down to fixed mindset is sort of got to protect the ego.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So we've been told that for our children, we need to praise their effort rather than the outcome. So you gave us a great example of that. Or we need to praise the things that are in our control versus the ones that are out. So how can we apply this to our lives as adults?
Yeah. So when you sit down for dinner with your kids, a lot of parents might ask, like, did you have fun today? How'd it go? And we're sometimes wanting to highlight things that go well. And I kind of would encourage parents to open up space to talk about things that didn't go so well. Like, what'd you fail at today? What'd you learn about yourself? What was challenging? And when your kid, if they feel, or athlete if you're a coach, or student if you're a teacher, coworker, that when they answer, also being willing to share, oh yeah, I've had some of those mistakes, and I can relate to the discomfort of this or the embarrassment of that. Normalizing that is a part of becoming great. Yeah. So if you don't have adversity or mistakes or errors, that's a red flag.
Right.
That's a red flag.
Right.
So if you come home from school, everything's great all the time, and I only ever get great grades, okay, is it too easy for you? Because I want to know where you're challenged.
Right.
And I want to see you have to get up sometimes at 5 a.m. because your alarm didn't go off and now you're having to do this. And, what'd you learn about yourself with that? So really enthusiastically sinking in and leaning in to the growth stuff and giving space for the conversations, sharing your own stuff, all of that.
We actually play a game at the camp house around the dinner table called High Low Buffalo.
All the kids. This sounds fun, Dr. Camp.
Everybody goes, so you have to tell the high is the best part of your day, the low is the worst part of your day, and the buffalo is the craziest thing that happened to you that day. And the kids love it, and the parents go too. So my wife Erica and I, we have to share ours, and it opens up the door to these conversations. So sometimes when something great happens, why'd that happen? How do you think? And so it allows you to lean in and try to praise the effort. And then sometimes when they talk about the lows, how did that make you feel? What'd you do about it? And try to say, okay, and help them figure out what the next steps are in that and how they can deal with that. And
yes,
it opens the door to those conversations, which is great.
Yes, and then praise them and how they respond.
Yes.
Less about the fact that they got in a fight with their friends or, but gosh, so you are thinking about going and talking to your teacher about that. That takes some guts as a sixth grader.
Right.
Kudos. Okay. Let me know how that goes tomorrow.
That's great. That's great. All right. So now let's talk about some other practical steps that we can put into place. So are there some clear steps or practices that we need to be doing? And you've mentioned several things kind of along the way here, but now I want to kind of get this organized into a list or sort of a step-by-step approach for people.
Okay, so we've talked about perfectionism. I think that would be something where instead of trying to be perfect and never have mistakes or errors, it's not that we're going to aim to be imperfect or make mistakes. It's just that when mistakes or errors happen, we view it as an opportunity to grow. And that we appreciate that when we are striving for high standards, mistakes are on the journey. They're a part of it. And it's a part of mastering anything.
Along those lines for that one too, I often like to say, what's the mistake I think I'm going to make? What am I going to make? And so you almost have made the decision as a mistake is coming. I know it's coming. Can I anticipate it? Maybe, maybe not. But it's much easier for me. I have found rather than kind of blowing through the mistake and not seeing it and then trying to look backwards, it's often much easier for me to say, all right, I'm going to mess this up somewhere. I wonder where I'm going to blow it. Where am I going to mess this thing up? And that can be a really helpful shift for me in doing that too, because then when it happens, you're like, oh, there it is. I was looking for that.
I was planning for this. I kind of have a game plan. Yeah, there was actually, and I'm not going to get this quite right because I don't know who the professor was. And it was a couple of years ago where somebody publicly, they were praising his resume. He had applied to all these, he won an award in academia, had applied to all these grants, very successful in these big schools. And he said, thank you. I'm honored that all my achievements you all think, are great. But what I'm really most proud of is all the grants I applied to and never got, all the schools I applied to and never got in, all these awards that I was in the running for but never got. And he actually typed up 40 pages of his, I wouldn't even call it failures. I would say they like going for it.
Yeah.
Growth resume. And that was unbelievably impressive. The things that he had stretched for and challenged and tried and not had the outcome he wanted. And that's actually what he took more pride in. I wish people could submit those resumes because it was pretty spectacular, some of the stuff he had gone for.
Yeah, it's almost certain. I mean, whatever, the person that's hit the most home runs has had the most strikeouts.
Oh, Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
Some of our generation maybe
missed the most shots and won the most awards, lost the most
That's exactly right.
awards too. So
that's exactly right.
A lot of it is number of shots on goal is
Absolutely.
one of the most important things.
And getting reps in the adversity. Like if we don't ever try, we don't ever fail, which then failing feels intimidating and horribly scary. Mm-hmm. So I'll just stay over here and play it safe.
I recently saw a study too where they looked at in the academic community scientists that had a major breakthrough, and they tried to see what were the factors that correlated with the breakthrough, and age was one of them. So the older you were and the more experience you had, the more likely you were to have a breakthrough. But then they looked into the data in more detail. They found that age wasn't the strongest predictor. It was the number of publications and other studies that you had. So it's not just age, it's the number of times you have attempted. And people, the longer you're around, the more attempts you've made. So it sort of correlates with age, but the number of attempts is much stronger predictor of the success and the outcome.
That's exactly. So that would be sort of, we got the not being perfectionistic and then that.
Perfect.
However we want to phrase that. And
so don't strive for perfection. Look at mistakes as an opportunity to go. We're going to say take more shots on goal.
I love that. Yeah, that's good.
This is a good list.
And then with that, kind of the science would back practicing grace with ourselves when we do have the adversity. That's a part of getting better. Let's go. Let's learn from it and let's go. We don't need to dwell. We don't need to fixate on it. We don't need to harbor, sadness. And then I would say in because this is a trainable mindset, considering places in your life that you can get reps in this, that you can practice or train a growth mindset. So adopting, instead of I have a test tomorrow, I know this sounds kind of funny, but viewing it as an experiment of let's see how my studying and my prep and my ability to stay focused, my ability to pace myself through a test, let's see how that goes.
Right. We talked about earlier in our session that we did with Carlos Correa on failure about you want to find ways to fail quicker and safer.
Yes.
And so I think that's another way too, is like part of this mistake thing is sometimes getting out there and making mistakes can be incredibly beneficial. We all recognize, though, some of those mistakes have major negative consequences. So, like, for me in the surgery world, obviously I can't make mistakes in the operating room, but there are other places that we can. Like, we can go into the lab and we can practice and we can use simulators and we can do other things. So how can I get out there and fail quickly do it in a safe way?
That's right.
And then you get more shots on goal that way faster. And so I almost think in every area, whatever you're doing, whether it's professional sports or whether it's surgery or you're teaching or you're at home with your kids, like there are ways you can figure out how can I get these reps in? How can I make these mistakes quickly? And then not only do you acquire more skill as you get more reps, but you also just get more comfortable making mistakes and getting things wrong. So you're just practicing it
navigating it,
which I think could be really helpful.
Because if you're too afraid to have that failure, then you avoid and you won't do the practice on the surgery. And then, oh my gosh, we don't want a surgeon that hasn't had enough reps.
Yes. And so I actually like to think about that as like you're almost forcing failure, doing it in a safe way.
That's right.
Which I think can be really helpful.
That's right. Another strategy is we kind of talked about, you brought up the social comparison. So I sometimes will say compared despair. It's just rarely very productive for us. And so if you are going to, then I think you got to have high awareness and make sure you're really using it constructively or productively.
Yes. Yeah. So using others as inspiration, but not necessarily saying that is my definition of success.
Right.
Yeah. Using it as a tool to educate, not as a comparison to either tell yourself you're better than you are or worse than you are.
Yeah, that's right.
Tell me a little bit about feedback. And, we talked about, you mentioned that earlier, how feedback is really critical to this growth mindset process. So how would you recommend our listeners incorporate or seek feedback to help improve their growth mindset?
Yeah, probably looking at the realms in their life where they're wanting to improve or get better. That could be relationships. It could be in a workplace. Performance realm, and then looking for ways to get the feedback. So, we've been doing this particular program for years now. We've never really actually sent out a survey to get feedback on how this program is received. Or in my relationship with my kids or my spouse, I might actually ask, like, hey, I've never really asked you this, but how do you like blank, blank, and blank. Does that work well for you? Do you want me to give you a 5-minute warning when we need to get out the door versus let's go, everybody, hustle? I mean, kids, athletes, people will have feedback for you. They're just often too afraid to maybe share it because they're afraid of how you're going to respond. But if you open that up, it's like, yeah, I'm receptive to feedback. Give it to me. It's going to only make me better and make us better as coworkers. People will be willing to share it.
I love that. We struggle with feedback so much in our society. We all say we want it and we need it, but then we get it. We don't really like it and we're uncomfortable giving it. It's a mess.
Yeah.
So we actually have some sessions coming up dedicated to giving good feedback and receiving good feedback.
Cool.
But a couple of things that I have found really helpful is that oftentimes asking for feedback before an event. If I say, hey, you did that today. You said, hey, let's give feedback, based on how this goes. I want you to tell me at the end. Okay, now I have a heads up. We're going into this thing. We'll give each other feedback when we're done. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I have found really helpful that has opened the door for me is after something, I'll tell somebody, hey, I'm really trying to get better at this. Tell me 3 things I should have done differently. And that comment I found to be so helpful because then I'm not saying, would you give me some feedback? I'm basically saying one, I've stated that I want to get better. 2, I didn't ask you for feedback. I actually kind of told you, which is a little bit aggressive, but that makes people say, oh, he really wants it. He's commanding this of me. This is not even optional. And then I say, tell me 3 things. So it's like, okay, he's wanting a lot here. And maybe they can't come up with 3 things, but if you ask for 3, you're more likely to get 1. If you ask for 1, you'll probably get 0. So I found that super helpful. Tell me 3 things that I should have done better or could have done better there is another
great.
that I think is really helpful. You also mentioned earlier, we were talking about praising the effort versus the outcome. A concept that we mention a lot here in the Human Optimization Project is process satisfaction. And I think that's something else that can really foster a growth mindset is that you don't judge yourself based on the outcome or the thing that you can't control. You judge yourself based on the process. And not to say if the outcome was bad, maybe it was because the process is bad, but you say, okay, I've learned something though. I can change that. I can make some adjustments. But I think if you can continue to have that process satisfaction and focus on the process, that can be more helpful than focusing on the end result.
Yes. What you're really saying there is basing your self-worth, basing your esteem, basing your confidence, your sense of value on how well did I do my process versus what actually occurred. Full control.
Yeah,
so,
excellent.
Yeah, and with the growth mindset, I think one more big thing you we're talking about the feedback piece. Another one that is a sort of a simple one to look for in your life is where am I sort of maybe unconsciously or consciously avoiding things that are kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's usually an indicator, like a little antenna of, oh, there's some growth in that space. Because again, we're wired to either get defensive, fight, literally, flee, and avoid, escape, pretend it's not there, or freeze and play dead in our times of survival. So more often than not, we're going to be wired to want to avoid. So gosh, I've kind of been avoiding having that conversation with my boss. Why? Oh, because it feels threatening and uncomfortable. Stepping in, if you can, stepping into those spaces that are uncomfortable usually help us grow. We do not grow when things are cushy and comfy.
Right.
We sit back and coast and be like, that was fun. Mm-hmm. We don't grow. We grow, and the reason why we harbor on negative feedback so much is because, we will actually hear that and grow from it.
Yeah, we pay attention when we're uncomfortable.
Yes, we pay attention when we're uncomfortable. We grow when we're uncomfortable. So inherently, discomfort is absolutely essential to success. Mm-hmm. So if you're going through life largely every day feeling comfy, that's a little red flag of where can I challenge myself to feel uncomfortable. You know what? I'm actually going to start in my job. I'm going to take on a little more leadership role. I'm going to give more presentations. Those terrify me. But I'm actually going to say yes to just one more this month. Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. And actually, as you were saying that, and you're talking about being uncomfortable, one of the other steps or tips that I came to mind for me was actually trying to intentionally tell others about mistakes you've made. oftentimes we make mistakes in our life, but nobody's around, nobody's affected. It's not a big deal. Maybe you meant to say one thing, you said another, but even if it's a small mistake, and it's easy just to keep that to yourself and let that pass or ignore it. I think those are great opportunities to tell somebody else, I made this, guess what I did today, or listen to this mistake that I made. And in reality, they'll probably say, oh, that doesn't seem like that big a deal. But I think that process is really valuable because now I am developing the habit of identifying my mistakes, telling them to other people. So I'm sharing them, so I'm less scared of them. And then usually getting the feedback that it's actually going to be okay, or what are you going to do next? Here's the next step. And you realize, oh, okay, this is something I can easily overcome. So I think telling other people, preferably somebody who knows you, loves you, and cares about you, can be a really helpful strategy as well.
100%. And you're role modeling. So you're also the people that are around you are like, oh, wow, they did that. That means maybe I can do that too.
Yeah. And speaking of role modeling, when you talk to other people, like particularly your children, about these type of concepts, you're reinforcing that same thing for yourself when you're telling it to them.
And when I come to my kids and say, woo, I did not handle that situation very well this morning. I was kind of impatient. I didn't, look at it from your lens. I'm actually going to really work on that for the future. Next Saturday when we're rush on time again, I'm gonna take a moment to think about it from your lens. Literally my conversation with my 10-year-old last night. So
those are great. We have callbacks in our house all the time, and it's like, here's what I should have said. And so often it's interesting because then the kids will say, you know what, Dad, that's okay. I understand why you said that. I didn't realize you had this, and this going on. And so it's like it gives them it's great for me to practice that, but also gives them a chance to coach me, which is really helpful. And they learn more when they're teaching too.
That's
so.
Right. And they know you're working on stuff.
Reverse classroom, which is great. Okay, fantastic. So this has been excellent. I've taken a lot of notes here, so I'd like to summarize real quick. I'll run through my notes, and then I'm going to give you a chance to answer our 3 big questions, sort of rapid fire at the end. So first, you defined a growth mindset as something that we believe that our abilities can be shaped and changed through effort and strategies and feedback, and that we have control and we have some agency. You listed a lot of benefits, some of them being more resilient, that we want to grow, that we're going to be more receptive to feedback. It's going to improve performance in sort of every area of our lives. We're going to learn from our mistakes, and it's also going to increase our confidence and resiliency, which then have positive feed-forward loops in really every area of our life.
Yep.
Growth and fixed mindsets approach mistakes differently. And this was new to me. I hadn't thought about this, but if you have a fixed mindset, it impacts how you behave before an event or activity, how you behave during that event and activity, and how you reflect on it afterwards. So in all 3 stages.
Kind of like a lens of glasses that you have on that filter your mindset going in, your mindset during, and your mindset after.
Yes, absolutely. And then we all tend to default to a fixed mindset for a lot of reasons. One, because we tend to look for threats. We're wired to seek out negativity. Unfortunately, we heavily weight it, but also there's cultural reasons because so much of our world is outcome based, which can lead us to that. And then we talked a lot about the social comparison, which can lead to a fixed mindset. So we're wired for this as well. And it's a big challenge because we do have to live in society. So we need to interact with other people. We got to be careful about how we compare ourselves to them. You did give us confidence that this is growth mindset in and of itself is a skill that we can train and improve. And then you gave us some great steps here on how to do it. I'm going to quickly run through those steps. So I wrote 12 of them down. So number 1, don't aim for perfection. Know that that's not going to be the case. Look at mistakes as an opportunity to grow is number 2. Number 3, take more shots on goal. Do it safely. Number 4, have grace for yourselves. Number 5 is practice and do so in a way that's safe. Number 6, force failure or mistakes, but do it in a way that's going to have a minimal impact. Number 7, don't compare yourself to others in an unhealthy way. Do it only in healthy ways. Number 8, seek feedback. Number 9, take joy in the process and really focus on that rather than the outcome. Number 10, ask yourself, what am I avoiding or what is it that makes me uncomfortable? Number 11 is tell others about your own mistakes so you get used to it. And then number 12 is to reach out to those people, tell them and try to teach them and help them grow, and they'll do the same.
You were a good student. You were a good student in school, Dr. Camp. I'm impressed.
All right, now your turn here. So you can summarize, answer our 3 big questions for us, kind of rapid fire answers here. So number 1, what is a growth mindset and why does it matter?
Yeah, just this idea that our abilities can be trained and practiced and rehearsed with good strategies and effort.
Excellent. Number 2, why do we tend to default to a fixed mindset, and what are the consequences?
Yeah, we're wired to look for threats because it's more adaptive for survival to notice the big claws and how big that bear is than to notice the cute little bird in the tree and the rainbows.
Right.
And if we know that about ourselves, then okay, cool. I'm aware and I can maintain my focus on the things that are helpful for me, because the consequences of being in a fixed mindset is very limiting for us.
Yes.
In all forms and fashions, physically, psychologically, socially.
Okay. And then our third one, what steps can we take to build a growth mindset so that we can flourish in both life and work?
Yeah, well, that summary of that list, Dr. Camp,
yes.
quite long. I would summarize one big thing with some of that is just the taking risk. Be willing to put yourself out there and take a risk, especially if it's uncomfortable. That's a good sign. When we're anxious and worried and how things are going to go, we get cautious. Go for it. Take action, and don't worry about the cost of the mistakes. Try to see the value in the growth side of it.
Love it. All right. So we always like to end with a challenge or a call to action for our audience because we want them to start doing this stuff and turning it into behavior. So, I mean, you made this so easy for us. You gave us 12 different strategies that we can use. So I'm going to tell the audience, pick one, whatever one of those you think is the easiest for you. And it's okay if it's easy. In fact, that's the best place to start.
Yep.
And it may seem small, but remember, we're living on a spectrum here. We're trying to take one step forward towards a growth mindset. So just pick one. And if you don't know which one to pick, I would say tell others about mistakes. I think about your mistakes, not theirs, yours. Pick one mistake that you've made and tell somebody and see how they respond. And see, first time it might be uncomfortable. You do it a few times, it's going to get pretty easy, pretty comfortable. Carly, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great discussion. I've learned a ton, and I really appreciate you taking the time and effort.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Good. So our title today was Developing a Growth Mindset, How to Grow Beyond Your Fixed Thinking. To our audience, thank you for joining us. Remember to live intentionally, consistently better. Keep striving to be the best human you can be, and never stop optimizing. Thanks for listening to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find us. Know someone who might benefit? Share the episode with them to join us in our mission to help as many people as possible become the best humans they can be. Have feedback or a topic idea? Email us at optimize@mayo.edu. And be sure to look for us on Instagram, X, and YouTube.
This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon for medical, professional, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified professional for any questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity is for informational purposes only and does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.